This is Elizabeth. I'm getting a lot of feedback on my side.
Yes, it is, Elizabeth.
Is that coming through to everyone?
Can we ask everybody to mute their mics, and so that we only have one mic on at a time? We'll go through some of the meeting logistics here in a minute, but in order for Elizabeth to get on and welcome everybody, if everybody could mute their mics, please.
All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Can everyone hear without too much feedback?
It's very difficult to hear.
There's some feedback there, Elizabeth.
Sometimes the problem is that when you are on the phone and also on your computer, it gives this echoing static we're hearing. So if whoever's on the phone and also on their computer, they need to turn their volume all the way down on their computer.
All right, how's that?
That's good, Elizabeth. Thank you.
Can anybody hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Are you still on mute?
Not on my side.
Elizabeth, we can hear you.
Hello?
Yes, Elizabeth, we can hear you. You can't hear us.
I can hear you too.
All right, so Elizabeth has asked me, this is Doug Martin with the Natural Resource Damage Program. She's asked me to go ahead and welcome everybody to the August 6th BNRC meeting. This is a Zoom meeting, so we do, or a Teams meeting, so we ask for some patience as we work through the agenda and the agenda items. The first on the agenda.
Hello?
Yes. Can you hear us, Elizabeth? The first thing on the agenda is the meeting logistics, and Miranda will go over those logistics.
Hello. So just a few reminders for the call. It is being recorded so that we can have documentation for the meeting. We are asking everybody to shut off their video stream. This way it makes our presentations a lot clearer and it doesn't cause as much lag times. We are asking that all BNRC members and members of the public that are wanting to make a comment use the raise your hand feature and then wait to be recognized by either myself or Elizabeth if she gets her audio working. Before speaking, we are asking that you don't unmute yourself as much as possible. This way we don't end up with the feedback issues. And then also we need you to announce your name because we can't see your faces. And some of these I don't see names. So before you start speaking, if you could please say your name. And then just to make sure that your microphone is remuted when you're done speaking. And we don't have a lot of action items on the agenda tonight. We will be having the last meeting minutes. So to vote on that for the council members, I'll just be going one by one and asking you what your vote is. It just kind of seems to be the easiest way to do that. So that's all I have.
Miranda, did you discuss the raise the hand thing for a question?
Yeah, so everyone needs to raise their hand if they can. It's just a little hand at the bottom of your screen. People on the phone cannot raise their hand, so that's not a feature with Teams, so they will have to, I think we'll just have to call on them.
I apologize. This is John McKee. I don't have a raise your hand feature, and I'm just confirming that everybody else does. I can just butt in. It doesn't matter. But I just want to make sure that the participants, other participants, do see that.
I don't see a raise your hand feature either, Don.
It's
Yeah,
It's
this
Dave.
is
I don't
we're not a
see a
public.
raise- It's the little hand in the middle of the screen bar at the bottom. Once you touch your screen, there it is, the screen bar where you put in video off, audio off, and 2 over is a hand. You just put your finger on the hand.
Yeah, on my screen, it's at the top.
Okay, so if you don't have that or don't seem to have that function, then we will just have to have everybody as organized as possible.
Okay. And so the way we'll work through, this is Doug Martin, and the way we'll work through that when there is a time for questions and comments on the agenda, we'll offer the council members, the BNRC council members, a chance to ask questions of the presenters first, and then we will open it to public comment after that. So once the council members are done asking questions, then the public can ask.
So I think, can everyone hear me? This is Elizabeth.
Yes, we can hear you now, Elizabeth.
Great, great. I think the problem, at least on my end, the feedback has gone away. So I just wanted to welcome everyone to our first virtual BNRC meeting. And I'm sure we will have a few issues along the way, but we're gonna just be patient and work our way through it. And I wanna thank everyone for attending tonight. And I just wanna go through quick and talk a little bit about what's on our agenda tonight. You have the agenda on the screen in front of you if you're online. The first thing on our agenda is the Parrot project. And it's actually the first 2 items. There's a presentation, which is the Parrot performance monitoring, conceptual site model, and then the Parrot project schedule update. So we'll do both of those together. We'll have Jim Ford from NRDP and Josh Vinson from Water and Environmental Technologies speaking on those. Next, we've got a letter before the council regarding the Basin Creek Reservoir. So we'll have a discussion on that. And then discuss the timeline for updating the BAO restoration plan. And then Harley is going to give us an update on consent decree public comment. With each of those, we'll take questions after the presentations. And as Doug said, we'll do like we usually do for BNRC council meetings, where we do questions from the council first and then questions from the public. And as usual, we have a lot on the agenda, so if you can be short and concise with your questions, and we'll try to get everything answered and move through this as best we can. So the first thing on our introductions and administrative items is the approval of the BNRC meeting minutes from the last meeting, which was March 12th of 2020. Did the council members get a chance to look over those meeting minutes? Does anyone, if you can raise your hand or just jump in if you have any changes to those meeting minutes? Not seeing any changes. Would someone make a motion on the meeting minutes? I see a thumbs up from Dave Williams.
So moved.
And do I have a second?
Second from McKee.
Great. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The meeting minutes pass. All right, we are going to take a minute here and talk a little bit about one of our departing BNRC members. We talked about this a little in the last meeting. Chad Oakrish has resigned in the spring, and we are going to miss the heck out of him. He was a great member of our council for 10 years, was very eloquent in providing comment to all of the issues that have come before us, and we're really going to miss Chad. But I'd also like to welcome our new member tonight, John Sesso. And I know John's on. John, did you want to say a few words to the council?
No, that's not really. I'm glad to be on the council. Appreciate the opportunity to serve on on this group, and look forward to working with all of you.
Welcome aboard. And then, Doug, did you want to do the introduction of Ray?
Sure, I will do that. As council and the public know that, recently, or I guess about a year ago now, Pat Canine left the Natural Resource Damage Program to take a position with Butte Silverbow. And then after that, we did start a solicitation for a new hire. We were fortunate enough to have Bill Callahan with the council help us with that selection. And through a pretty exhaustive search, and at the end of the day, we all agreed that we did select a very qualified member of the Upper Clark Fork River Basin. Ray Vinke is now the new natural resource damage environmental scientist who is staffed in the Butte office. And Ray started with us back, I want to say it was in July, it was June or July. I guess, Ray, you'll have to remind me when you started. But Ray's been there for a couple months. As Pat Canine indicated, his first few weeks he was going to be drinking from a fire hose, and he was. But I do think Ray is a well-qualified person for the Butte office, and he also adds a very nice diversity to the natural resource damage program with his background and his expertise in biology and the wildlife field. And I will turn it over to Ray to welcome himself and say hello. Ray, oh, there you go.
All right, am I on the air? So thank you, Doug, for the introduction, and Elizabeth, chairperson. I'm just honored to be here. I'm really appreciate the opportunity to live and work in Butte. I've lived in Montana for, I guess, 25 years or so, and never been in Butte, but it seems like most everywhere else in Western Montana. But I really love this community. I was just up at Walkerville looking at some revegetation sites, and kind of as I was standing there thinking, where else in the world can you be someplace with so much character, history, great views, and opportunities for restoration and reclamation. So anyway, so yeah, as Doug mentioned, I'm a biologist. I went to University of Montana did my master's work there in the wildlife program. I've worked for a variety of agencies, probably most pertinent. I worked for over a decade for FWP out of Phillipsburg and Anaconda as a wildlife biologist there. Worked throughout the watershed with communities on population management and habitat management. And then I guess most relevant to this, I worked in depth with natural resource damage program staff on developing the 2012 terrestrial restoration plan, as well as working on some lands projects in the Anaconda and Deer Lodge areas. So what's most important to me is working with communities and developing relationships where I think I have the greatest opportunity to influence land and water management and the human populations and wildlife that depend on those healthy habitats. So anyway, I guess what I really want to emphasize here is I'm here to listen and learn, probably for quite some time here. I look forward to working, closely with the community and hopefully getting to a time where we can all sit down in one room and see each other face to face and share a cup of coffee and visit. I would say I want to mention to folks that I really welcome people to reach out to me to share your perspectives, some of your ideas about restoration in the Butte Area 1, and maybe we can get that cup of coffee outside. So that's about what I've got.
Thanks, Ray, and I would second that for any of the council members or members of the public that do want to say hello to Ray, to reach out to him and say hello. And as he said, he has been out in the field quite a bit with a lot of our partners and looking at the small projects and the other projects around Butte. So if you have time, he's in the same building that Pat was in, up in the Thornton building on the 5th floor. And he's also willing to go outside as well. So if you have some time and want to reach out, please do so. And I would remind everybody to please turn off their videos for to help with the bandwidth. Thank you. And turn it back over to you, Elizabeth.
Welcome aboard, Ray. I've had a couple of field trips with Ray already, and I think he's going to fit right into the whole program. And we're glad to have him aboard. And with that, I think we'll transition right into the Parrot project schedule update with Jim Ford.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Greetings, everybody. This is Jim Ford with the Natural Resource Damage Program. Today, we have the conceptual site model to go through. It's based on all the data that we collected and the PMP, which, you know, we presented a number of times to the BNRC. I think what we'll do is we recorded this, Josh and I recorded this, hoping that it would be easier and there would be less technical difficulties. At the end of this sort of presentation, I'll go through the status of the Parrot project itself and the phase 2, and I also talk about what we're doing for the interim pumping plan, the pumping of the contaminated groundwater that's currently taking place. And then we'll get into questions and answers. So there's quite a bit of information in this report. We try to keep it at a fairly high level, but it's still a good 30-35 minutes. So, you know, if you do have questions, please just hold off to the end and we'll get to those. With that, Miranda, I think we're ready to roll this.
Hello, this is Jim Ford. I think most of you know me. I am the Parrot project manager. I'm also an employee of the Natural Resource Damage Program of the Department of Justice at the state. Today, Josh Vincent and I are going to talk about the conceptual site model that's been developed off the performance monitoring program that we've implemented for monitoring groundwater and groundwater impacts from the Parrot Tailings project. This is a recording. We recorded this earlier in the week. I'm going to go through sort of an introduction and how we constructed the PMP. Josh is going to go through the results and sort of an overview of the report. And then I have a few items I'll wrap up with our path forward, some Parrot-related items as far as phase 2 removal action, and some initial responses to questions we've already received on this report. And then after that point, we'll open it up to sort of live questions. So, many of you have seen this slide many times, but again, I think we need to reiterate it almost every time we talk about the Parrot. Our main goal is to protect the creeks, Blacktail and Silverbow Creek, from contaminated groundwater discharge. That is our primary goal for the project. You know, there's others: eliminate known sources of contamination to the alluvial aquifer, enhancing the riparian corridors. Here's another slide that you've seen a couple times. Our Parrot Performance Monitoring Program, the PMP, was to develop and implement a monitoring network, sampling methodology, and evaluation criteria to characterize the existing hydrologic and geochemical baseline conditions. So we're going to set this baseline of how the system is prior to initiating the Parrot project. And that way, the difference is the impacts from the Parrot. Now, we want to do that, one, to assess the impacts from the removal action and the ET cover, but we also wanted to ensure that the removal activities do not interfere with CERCLA remedial infrastructure. That's a statutory requirement that restoration doesn't impact remedy. It's also a requirement for this project. So the chronology of the PMP, we finalized, had a draft final work plan in September 2017. We had a public meeting and presented the work plan to the BNRC later in September, and then we immediately initiated the monitoring well installation and then water quality monitoring later in the fall of 2017. And again, we were in a rush because we wanted to get enough water quality and water hydraulic information prior to starting the phase 1 of the Parrot tailings removal. So the objectives of the PMP work plan were to identify monitoring points, additional monitoring wells, evaluate data gaps. We address those with new wells, and we developed a monitoring network that basically looked at flow and water chemistry and each of the alluvial units, upper, middle, and lower. We wanted to document the flow and water chemistry in the subdrain. We wanted to focus on groundwater and subdrain flow and water chemistry proximate to the Parrot tailings. Now, the reason why the subdrain is important is that it is the primary defining hydrogeologic feature in the area. It is there to collect contaminated groundwater and keep it from discharging to Upper Silverboat Creek, which it does well, but it impacts the flow regime of the area. We also want to look at temporal trends in water levels and water quality over time. All this feeds into formulating this hydrogeologic conceptual site model, which we call a CSM for short. So, let me orient you here. Up here in the upper right, within this black polygon is the excavation area of the Parrot. Each one of these red dots or green dots is a monitoring well location that may include more than one well. So we developed a monitoring program with transects of wells that are perpendicular to flow. So flows coming from the Parrot, generally downhill, and eventually discharging into either Blacktail Creek or Silverboat Creek. So again, flows downhill. We set up monitoring networks above the Parrot excavation area, which is 8A prime, directly below the Parrot excavation area, which is B2B prime, and Josh is going to be talking about this quite a bit more, this particular transect. About halfway down, C and C prime, DD prime, and then finally E and E prime, parallel and directly adjacent to Blacktail Creek. Now, you got to think about these transects, and not only horizontal extent, but each one of these dots represents either the upper alluvial, middle alluvial, or lower alluvial. So there is sort of a second dimension to these transects that is vertical. So you need to think about that because groundwater flows not only horizontally but vertically. So the conceptual site model, we installed 25 new monitoring wells and utilized 52 existing monitoring wells. We have 8 surface water and subdrain locations. We utilized all the historical reports and interpretations from other stakeholders. We included in this CSM report 6 monitoring events, one in the fourth quarter of 2017, all the quarters in 2018, and the first quarter of 2019. So what we have here today and what Josh is going to review is the CMS report itself and the visualizations of things like such as plume maps. Now again, I want to reiterate that the EVS visualizations, they're not a model, they're not a predictive tool to predict concentrations. They're actually just a tool to visualize the existing data. So with that, I'll turn it over to Josh to review the document for us.
Thanks, Jim. So I will try to be brief here. This is a big, complex report. It's got a lot of data. I'd like to recognize that this took a whole team of folks at WET, hydrogeologists, geochemists, engineers, and such. I am the messenger. I'm going to try to keep this pretty high level. The report has all kinds of detail. If you'd like to look at that, submit questions on specifics. We can certainly be happy to answer your questions. So what we're going to do here is we're going to step through sort of 4 major components of the CSM: the geology, the groundwater flow, the chemistry, and the geochemistry of all the data that we collected, and sort of break down each piece and talk about our major conclusions. So let's start with geology. So consistent with previous studies, we did see, and we do agree with the fact that there are multiple sub-aquifers identified in the BAO. We have the upper alluvial unit, the middle alluvial unit, and the lower alluvial unit. There's approximate depths of those units, and this was pretty consistent with what we've seen in the past. We did, in a few of our wells, see a shallower perched zone that sort of played into some of our conclusions and was a little bit different than what folks have seen in the past. You know, our PMP well locations address data gaps and also some areas where there was some interpretation of wells across different units, or wells were lumped into a specific unit when that wasn't quite the case. So we were able to get a little more granular there and better define some of these alluvial units down valley. We were also able to address a lack of well density near the subdrain. So we were able to get a lot of our PMP wells very near the subdrain so that we could better determine flow conditions in and around that subdrain. And lastly, we were able to look at the bedrock control within the BAO, and you know, really what we saw something a little bit different. Some previous interpretations had the fact that, you know, there's shallow groundwater at the Parrot, which then moves into a deep alluvial area in the mid valley, and then the bedrock shallows up again and pushes all groundwater flow back up at the lower end of the valley. What we saw is that some of that control to the south and west is just not there, and that's allowing a flow path to the southwest discharging to Blacktail Creek. So what I'm showing you here, let's take a second to talk about this. This is your orientation map here. So this is up gradient to down gradient. This orange spot is the Parrot tailings. And so when you take that down to this cross section, you have up gradient on the left, down gradient on the right. And this is the geologic cross section down from upper to lower down valley. And what you can see here is, again, this is the Parrot site. This is the elevated railroad tracks. There's some kind of major surface features shown on here. As you can see, it's a very complex and heterogeneous geological setup. The aquifer units are, you know, they're pretty well defined right up by the Parrot. They're a little bit less defined as you move down gradient. And what you can see here is you're probably thinking, oh, geez, what's all this white space? Well, those are just areas where, you know, despite all the wells that were installed, we still have some areas where we could use some more data. Especially in the lower alluvial unit, those are deep and expensive, and there's less wells there than in some of the other units. So, again, the light shaded areas are aquifer units, and the darker shaded gray and orange areas are either clay or, you know, they're aquitard units, and they're not transmissive units. So, this is a snapshot out of our geologic EVS visualization. So what you see here is this is the defined bedrock unit. The different shades are sort of weather bedrock versus competent bedrock. And as I spoke earlier, this is the Parrot site up here. This is Blacktail Creek. You can see Silverbow Creek coming down here, but what you see is this area of shallow bedrock moving into a deep alluvial part of the valley with no defined bedrock, and then again shallowing up. But what you see here is we have some wells out here. You know, we're seeing not seeing bedrock control here to the southwest, and so that's why we're seeing flowing chemistry towards Blacktail Creek. Okay, so enough on geology, let's move to groundwater flow. So what we did on our flow conditions is basically, Jim talked about the network. We took a combination of monthly manual water level measurements, and then we have a subset of those wells. I think it's 28 where we have continuous monitors in the well. So that collects a data point every 15 minutes. We download them every so often, and we know exactly what's going on as far as changes in groundwater levels in each well. Some of the high points of what we saw, upper valley wells towards the Parrot, we saw just a single high groundwater event. It was we call it a peak. It was in the fall, late summer, fall. And that's not really typical of what you see, but the reason why we see that in this system is that you have the watershed is sort of cut off. The creek is cut off, and the alluvium is cut off from its watershed due to the Parrot or to the Berkeley pit and other things. So we see a later peak later in the year. And then down valley, as you get towards the streams, we see a double peak. We see a spring and a fall peak. The spring peak is more indicative of your spring runoff, and so that's showing connection to the groundwater down valley. And then we're also seeing the fall peak. So our Transect approach, again, it shows us a flow path sort of running to the south and west of the subdrain at Silverbow Creek towards Blacktail Creek. It also shows us our flow conditions show us that in the upper alluvial unit, the subdrain does capture a fair amount of shallow groundwater, but that in the middle alluvial units, the deeper units, it's a little bit more limited in reporting. And we also saw in our groundwater flow, which I'll show you in a couple of hydrographs, we see some mounding right near the subdrain, and that's due to the fact that the subdrain does plug and affect flow in the immediate area. Okay, so I'm going to show you a couple hydrographs. Just real briefly, what this is basically water level over time. So we have groundwater elevation on the left. These are half-foot increments. And then we have time on the bottom axis, January of 18 through April of 19. And so this is the change in water level over that time period. And the boxes are manual measurements. The line is our continuous transducer measurements. The other thing to point out here, these vertical dashed lines are dates when the subdrain was jetted. So those are jetted, the subdrain is jetted twice a year, and we know those dates, and so we looked at what effects we saw in some of our wells. Now, PMP02B, so locationally that is in our B to B prime transect, so it's right near the subdrain and it's right near Harrison Avenue, and B means that it's in the middle alluvial unit. So our A wells are upper alluvial, our B wells are middle alluvial, C wells are lower alluvial. So that denotes middle alluvial unit, and one thing to pick out of this hydrograph, first you can see that sort of single peak later in the year in our water level, and then you can also see that there isn't a whole lot of effect when the subdrain is jetted, which tells us that there isn't a strong connection to water levels from the subdrain jet. So now we're going to move ahead to PMP8A, and so this well is located down valley in the D to D prime transect. It's actually located near the Diggins East area in a vacant lot across from the KOA. And the differences we see here, first of all, remember this is an upper alluvial well, and it's closer to the stream. So you see this spring peak, and then you see this later season peak as well. And also what you see here is on these dates of the subdrain jetting, you see significant changes in groundwater elevation. So upwards of, almost 1.5 feet here in the fall of 2018. And what you also see here is you see these groundwater elevations slowly rising up to the date of the jetting, which tells us that the groundwater is mounding up, and that is indicative of flow unable to enter the subdrain. So pretty important stuff, and we use this in our evaluation. And so you may ask, why does the subdrain need to be cleaned, and what causes it to plug? Well, this is a photo compliments of our friends at the Bureau of Mines. This was the actual subdrain pipe prior to installation, and what you can see here is that these screened openings are relatively small, and they're actually only located in 2 locations on the pipe. So the majority of the pipe's actually solid, and then we have these screen openings. And what we see here, especially down valley, is the metals start to precipitate as oxygen is introduced into the system somewhat through the subdrain itself, and so it precipitates, and it just eventually plugs this pipe, and so they have to come through it and they clean it out, and then it starts to function again. But we can actually see that in our flow data. So I want to show one more hydrograph, and this is from our C Transect. So this is sort of mid-valley. It's PMP05A. This is located basically between Silverboat Creek and the subdrain and Columbus Plaza. And so what you're seeing here is you are seeing irrigation effects, or effects from the irrigation well that's located at Columbus Plaza. So every time you see a line, this sort of, up and down here, that is that well pump kicking on. And so what that tells us is that irrigation well is connected to this well, which is very near the subdrain. And we also, similar to the previous hydrograph I showed you, we're seeing some effects from the subdrain cleaning. So that was in our conclusions. We just wanted to kind of point out how we came to that conclusion. So again, this shows this is a potentiometric surface map or a groundwater flow map from July of 2018, and what you see here is you can see the effects of the subdrain. So this is capturing water in the upper alluvial unit, but its lateral extent is not quite as great now that we had more wells near the subdrain. And what you can also see here is this flow path sort of running towards Blacktail Creek here to the southwest. And there's a number of maps, groundwater flow maps from different periods in different aquifers. So you can spend some time if you'd like and go through that in our report. So let's move on to chemistry. So I'll keep this pretty high level. We know there's multiple sources of contaminants in the upper BAO corridor. You guys have heard them thrown around quite a bit. Our scope is just east of Montana Street, so it doesn't include the BRW or the LAO area. In that area, the Parrot Tailings has by far the highest concentrations in groundwater in this region. So we did see a little bit of a signature of elevated concentrations in the Datings East area. And one thing to point out in the chemistry, we saw extremely low pH conditions near the Parrot, which increases the mobilization of metals. And up there, we've just overwhelmed the natural buffering capacity of the aquifer. So in a little more detail, these acidic conditions at the Parrot have happened for a very long time, and so really the contaminants are very mobile up there due to these low pH conditions. And we also saw in our chemistry, which tracked our groundwater flow evaluation, that we are seeing concentrations elevated along that flow path southwest of the subdrain towards Blacktail Creek. And again, this was supported by other studies done of sediment and sediment pore water in these areas. They also showed loading to the creeks. So it's just another data point that we use to support our conclusions. And then the last item to note on chemistry is, as this water migrates downstream, it does mix a little bit with some less contaminated water. pH rises, and the aquifer does start to regain some of its buffering capacity and partitioning capacity. So, a couple of maps here very quickly. This is October 2018. This is upper alluvial unit. Here's our Parrot tailings. This is a 4 pH contour line right here. So anything inside of this contour line is less than 4 pH. So very low, highly contaminated water. And then the pH, you can basically watch it migrate down valley, and you can see it run to the southwest towards Blacktail Creek, which is located right here. And this is a zinc contour map, also from October 2018, upper alluvial. Again, you see this bullet or this bullseye of high concentrations right at the Parrot, and then you can watch and see these concentrations migrate down a valley, and then eventually they migrate to the southwest and discharge to Blacktail Creek. So now I'm going to show you one of our EVS animations. This is zinc. And as Jim mentioned, there's a number of these as an appendix to the reports. You can click on these links. We have water levels, we have geology, we have some other concentrations over time. But what I'm going to show you here is zinc, and this is basically the extent of zinc concentrations in the valley. And again, just to reiterate, this is not a model, it's not predictive, this is actual concentrations, just plotting the data in 3D. And so I'm going to go ahead and run this out. You can see this is the Parrot tailings right here. So you can see this bullseye, high concentrations, and you can see that the concentrations going down and the extent growing. Again, this is Blacktail Creek, Silverbow Creek. So you can see these concentrations have migrated again to the southwest, and we're showing those as intersecting with the stream. And again, over here, this is sort of your legend. Red is high concentration, grading down to blue as lower concentration. So in a minute here, you'll see this video. So now we're going to turn into the 3D mode. And so this is basically contamination with depth. It's easy to look at a map, a flat map, but you can see this contamination goes vertically as well. And basically the limits of our vertical model are the limits of our well network. So that's why you kind of see this cutoff. That's the depth of our lowest well that we have in our PMP list. And these are the actual wells themselves. So these are included in here. So you can see the number of wells. There's quite a few wells there, but there's still some areas where, especially vertically, where we don't have full control. But that gives you an idea. There's lots of visualizations of contamination versus geology and other things. So, but for the sake of time, we're going to move on. You guys can go check those out when you have time. So let's move on to geochemistry. So keep this pretty high level. I am not a geochemist, so we've had a lot of folks look at this stuff for quite some time. But basically, in a nutshell, the Parrot water has a geochemical signature, and we can track that down valley. The concentrations do decrease with distance from the source area, and again, our geochemistry and geochemical data also show us that we are seeing this southwest component of flow towards Blacktail Creek. So I'm going to show you a few of these transects. So Jim talked about these transects before, and I showed you the linear transect sort of down valley, which is right here, but I wanted to talk just a little bit about these stiff diagrams, which is a geochemical tool to evaluate water quality. And what these are, you kind of see a little legend here, but basically it maps the cations and anions, the major elements in the water, and gives you an idea of what's going on there. This kick over here, they call this a sulfate shift, and so generally, the non-technical description of this is that the bigger you see this diagram, the more contaminated the water is. So you can see here, once again, B to B prime, so this is north to south, and this is a slice across this cross-section, which we're going to talk about again later, BB prime. Here's the subdrain, and what you can see is we've got wells very near the subdrain, and again, this is these are wells in the upper alluvial, the middle alluvial through this piece, and then this is the lower alluvial. So you can see pretty highly contaminated water very near the subdrain, and then as we move out away from the subdrain, you can see concentrations and cations and anions concentrations start to drop off. But you can also see very contaminated water in the upper, the middle, and the lower units at this transect. So moving down gradient, this is sort of a mid-valley C to C prime. Again, to the north here, this is an area where it'd be nice to have some more data, but we do have pretty good data right around the subdrain. And what you can see here is, again, we've got some pretty high contamination in the upper and the middle units. Also, quite a ways away from the subdrain, and this direction is sort of the south direction where we're seeing this flow path. So, and then moving down to D prime, this is getting pretty close to the bottom, and so things start to get a little more complex down here. You can see the geology gets a little more heterogeneous. You can also see that the concentrations are starting to dilute. pH starts to increase, so the buffering capacity starts to return to the aquifer. And then moving on to the E transect, which is right up grade, it's right along the creeks. Again, north to south, subdrain is here, and what you can see here is we're seeing a component in the upper alluvial that's down here that's supporting our conclusion that there's some contaminants discharging to the stream. So let's move on from the geochemistry. I want to talk about this mass balance transect B prime. So this is there's a memo and an appendix at the back of the report. You can get into the details. I'm going to keep this pretty high level, but we wanted to look at this B to B prime transect because this was the first transect down gradient of our Parrot removal area and ET cover areas. So, we wanted to document what the conditions are now, and then we also want to watch this over time to look at our effects. And, it goes back to goals and objectives of the work plan is to document performance of the removal and ET cover. So what we did is we calculated the total mass of copper and zinc moving through this transect. And I know that a lot of folks got excited about the comparison of the capture efficiency, but just want to clarify that this isn't quite an apples to apples comparison. There's a time difference between when the groundwater management report was published. They collected load or calculated loads at their vault, which was quite a ways down gradient from our B to B prime transect, which is basically right at Harrison Avenue. So what we did here is we basically calculated load for copper and zinc flowing through this transect. And these are some of our inputs. You can read the memo, but basically we used existing aquifer test transmissivity and conductivity values from a Bureau pump test from several years ago, which was right in this transect, so it's pretty good data. And then we used our groundwater elevations and flow and our chemistry data, and then we used that to calculate these loads. We used Darcy's law, and then in the middle alluvial unit, we wanted to break this down into a little more granular, and so we used these stream tubes to break down and look at these in between wells, but all across that transect. So at the end of the day, we came up with some summary loads, and again, the only thing I want to point out on this table here is that we actually looked at flow through the upper alluvial and middle alluvial units, and what you can see here is that based on our calculations, the vast majority of flow is running through that middle alluvial unit. And so here's our copper through the middle, our copper through the upper, zinc through the middle, zinc through the upper. We sum them up into these 66,207. And obviously, as I discussed, when you compare those to what was calculated in the groundwater management report, they're quite a bit off. But again, not quite an apples to apples situation. But the point I wanted to make here is that there's a lot of load flowing through this B2B cross section, and it's not all getting collected by the subdrain. So, and then the one last point I'll make is that we did make some assumptions at B2B prime that due to the low pH nature and very highly contaminated subsurface conditions, we did make an assumption that there was no buffering capacity in the aquifer, that everything has been basically maxed out, and so the load is flowing through this cross section pretty much with groundwater flow. So I'll just wrap this up real quick, turn it back over to Jim to talk about future steps. So geology, wells interpreted across the multiple alluvial units. We saw that perched zone that I talked about, and the other big piece of the geology is that bedrock does not entirely control the flow from deep to shallow, and it does allow for some flow to the southwest. And basically the capture zone of the subdrain we determined was smaller than reported, and that was mostly due to the fact that we have more wells near the subdrain. And again, we saw that bypass flow in our flow data, and then we also did see that we saw mounding and flow impacts near the subdrain due to the fact that there's some plugging that goes on there. Chemistry, very high concentration and very low pH, very low oxygen water at the Parrot, moves downstream. Geochemistry, again, as the plume moves down valley, water quality improves. We have really no buffering capacity in the aquifer at down gradient of the Parrot, immediately down gradient, and then the aquifers sort of regains some of that ability as we move down gradient. And again, our mass balance shows that there's a lower capture efficiency than previously reported, mostly due to flow in that middle alluvial aquifer. So with that, again, invite you to read the report and let us know if you have questions. We'd be happy to answer them. I'm going to turn it back over to Jim to wrap this up.
Okay, Josh. Well, thank you very much for taking us through all that information. It's substantial, and it really does it an injustice to try to jam it all in such a short period of time. But if you're interested, I think even reading the executive summary would help clarify some of the issues for folks. So I'm going to just try to wrap things up, but I wanted to say a few words here that of course, I think it's obvious, but the interpretation of these data and this report is a product solely of the state of Montana's. You know, EPA, BP, ARCO may have different ideas and different opinions of the system. So again, this is our report, this is our data, our analysis, and our report and interpretation. So let's talk about the PMP going forward. We're going to continue. Currently, we're contracted to continue quarterly groundwater monitoring, monthly water levels through July of 2022. I'd like to say that this is a very robust and complete monitoring system, which means it's also a fairly expensive component. We've spent over $1 million just on this monitoring, and we're spending about an additional $300,000 a year going forward with it. Although we think it's not only important for the Parrot and for protection of the creeks, I think it'll be very useful data for development of remedial designs, not only for groundwater, but for stormwater and other remedial components. So we also are currently implementing this interim dewatering system that we've presented to you before. We've had our pump in place. We're removing water anywhere between 50 and 80 gallons a minute. We operate it until the system could possibly freeze up, so typically between September and October. We started this year in April. We'll go as long as we can until we have freezing conditions. And so far, we've removed 6.6 million gallons of this highly contaminated water. High concentrations, low pH. pH, I don't know, 3.6 to 3.8, somewhere in that range. So for the phase 2 removal action, we're in the design process now. We had a number of components designed previously, but there was a few we left out for this second phase, including the ET cover system. We expect to bid the project this fall, and that we have a contractor under contract before the end of the calendar year. which will allow us to start construction very early in 2021, possibly with demolition first off, which can be done in the dead of winter, and then start excavation as soon as possible in 2021. We expect all phase 2 activities to take 2 field seasons, so we'll be wrapping things up in 2022. So I know you've seen this figure before. This is the excavation area, this purple and red hash mark where my cursor is. The red area was phase 1, the purple area is phase 2. Phase 2 has approximately 50% more waste material than phase 1. It also has substantial amounts of groundwater saturated waste. The rest of these hash areas are going to be receiving the ET cover. These wastes are not saturated by groundwater, so infiltration is the only real pathway to move contamination down to the groundwater system. So we've had some questions about the PMP and the consent decree. And does that change anything to the consent decree? Now, I don't speak entirely for the state, but I can say that the state is fully committed to the consent decree. The data and the results from this PMP for the state only reinforced what we already believed was true as far as groundwater, contaminated groundwater impacting the creeks, and that the current groundwater collection system wasn't sufficient. So that in part helped inform the state's position as far as components that needed to be included in the consent decree. So the current consent decree requires contaminated groundwater to be, additional contaminated groundwater to be collected, not only at Blacktail Creek, but in the Butte reduction works. Remedial designs are not completed, but BPAR and EPA have committed to hold public meetings to describe and discuss these remedial plans for keeping contaminated groundwater out of the creeks. So as soon as they get designs together, I'm sure there'll be meetings where this will be described and discussed in detail. Of course, we hope that this new and extensive data from the PMP will be used to develop and improve the remedial designs for not only groundwater, like I said, but stormwater basins and other remedial components. So one of the other questions we've got is, how do you know that contaminated groundwater is going to be safely contained in these remedial designs? The consent decree does have a very unique and innovative requirement to solve this problem. I've been working in CERCLA contaminated groundwater issues since the late 80s, and I can truly say that this is a unique and innovative requirement that I haven't heard of at any other Superfund site nationwide. It includes contaminant-specific concentration performance standards for in-stream sediments. So we didn't talk about that much here, but I know you have heard in the past from me and others that when contaminated groundwater discharges to these creeks, the contaminants in the water partition onto the in-stream sediments. So it's really the in-stream sediments that are receiving the contamination. And that's in large part, why the state of Montana uses total recoverable concentrations, which include a component of the sediments in their water quality standards. So we're using these in-stream sediment concentration standards as triggers for requiring additional contaminated groundwater capture if they are exceeded. Now, this all occurs after remedy implementation, and these in-stream sediment standards being exceeded, and it's not a remedy failure. Now, it's not a berm of a stormwater basin that ruptured or some other obvious source. If there's no obvious source as a remedy failure component, then additional contaminated groundwater capture would be required. So this is something unique. We're using in-stream sediments to use as a trigger value for contaminated groundwater. So with that, we're going to end the recording, and then we'll go to live questions. Thank you.
Okay, this is Jim Ford. I'm back alive, I guess. And I thought that we could get into the question and answers. And Elizabeth, if you want to, lead the direction with who maybe on the BNRC would like to ask questions, and then we could open it up to the public.
Sounds great, Jim. Do we have any questions from council members?
Jim, do you have any, this is Dave Williams. Do you have, one information that might be useful would be the water that's removed in the Parrot and shipped over to Montana Resources. Do you include that as an appendix or something?
Well, we come out with like monthly and quarterly reports as part of our agreement with Montana Resources. I think last year we had a tech memo that we produced, but I think we're going to pull together something that a little more robust. That we monitor, of course, water levels. We monitor the discharge contaminants at the discharge point, which this water is being discharged in their process pond and utilized in their circuit system. So I think we're going to pull that all into a more robust report. We did install an additional 5 monitoring wells here this summer to better define the drawdown from these activities. And Dave, we expect that there's going to be quite a bit more dewatering in this second phase. So we want to be able to adequately delineate the drawdown effects of that dewatering and how that might affect the flow regime in the alluvial aquifer, and if there's any potential effects towards the subdrain. So yes, I expect we'll have a report. So far we've only really had a tech memo.
Yeah, okay, that sounds reasonable. Yeah.
So,
Any other questions from council members?
Madam Chair, this is John Sesso. Following up on Dave's question, I see in that report 6.6 million gallons of water, dewatered, contaminated water has been flowed to the mine. I remember once seeing a report that the plume underneath the Parrot was in the 90 million gallon range. Do you have any more intelligence now that you've pumped 6 million gallons over to the mine? Whether you will continue to do that, number one, and what percentage of the overall plume might eventually be put back where it came from?
Okay, well, John, let me answer that second part first. We have an agreement with Montana Resources that allows us to not only bring waste, the tailings waste up there, but this contaminated groundwater, but it's for a limited duration of time. So that's all we're looking for now. If this system is needed along with other improvements for contaminated groundwater control under remedy, then I guess we could talk to MR and others about including it in it. But right now we've got a limitation in 2023 with MR for that water. Now, getting to the first part of your question about the volume of the quote Parrot plume, actually the Parrot has a number of plumes pretty much for each contaminant analyte. It's easiest to talk about it as like one plume, but it's actually a number of plumes that transport at different rates. But it's hard to say. So, if the Parrot was left in place as is, it would continue to leach contaminants and the plume would never end. It's not like a single volume of water. We expect through our removal action, though, that loading is cut off and that we would see, dramatic decreases in concentrations. The concentrations right now are extremely high because of this low pH water, extremely high. But we haven't done any sort of predictive analysis on trying to predict, you know, what sort of concentrations and when we'll have in the future. I do think that B prime transect is in the prime location to be able to document that, though, you know, so we have real numbers. But we haven't in any sense tried to predict anything. Did that get to your question, John?
Sure. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. It seems to me that the combination of work that is going to get done between the Parrot removal and the dewatering portion of the project that is ongoing, and then phase 2 is likely going to remove the primary source of contaminants, and then that in combination with the removal of planned in the east diggings and the north diggings and the blacktail berm and the Butte reduction works, combined with what I consider the suspenders, the groundwater collection system, and combined with the groundwater monitoring program you mentioned, you know, leaves us with a pretty good solution to a pretty complex problem. So at the end of the day, we get a remediated and restored aquifer, and Butte wins. So thanks. I reserve other questions based on what I might hear from the public, Madam Chair, but thank you very much.
Thanks, John. Any other questions from the council?
Madam Chair, this is John McKee. Jim, just right now, of the data that's out there, anyone that's collecting data, anyone that's got models like this, what is the most, or not advanced, but what's the most complete model that we have to reference right now? Is it this current one that we were presented tonight?
You know, the short answer is yes. I believe it is. I believe that there was a number of critical locations where we needed additional data, and that's where we installed these 25 new monitoring wells. And I think because of those wells and because of how we set up our monitoring program, that this is the most complete and accurate picture of the system.
Thank you. And follow up, Madam Chair. So if this is the most complete and accurate model of the system that we currently have, is the full level of, I don't know, the data of everything that's been collected, be it raw or analyzed, available to all the parties that need it to, you know, enact the best remedy possible under CD?
Well, the short answer is, I think overall, yes, John. We provided the original first 2 quarters of our water quality data and a data summary report that also included the details of the well installation and the borings, you know, the lithology. So that was back in 2018. It took us a while to get the other 4 quarters that we have in the report into a data summary report. So we just got that out last week, or I can't, you know, earlier this week. So other parties such as EPA and BPAR just got that additional data, but all the data is available. I mean, we're a public entity, everything's available. It's just getting it in the right format.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Any other council questions? Hearing none, I think we'll go ahead and open it to the public. If you could raise your hand, we'll take questions from the public. I see Josh Bryson. Go ahead.
Hello?
You're on, Josh.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And thank you for the presentation, Jim. That was good. And we agree with your assessment that the number of wells and the amount of data that you guys have collected will be very useful to the remedy process moving forward. So we appreciate all that work. It's important, we think, from Atlantic Richfield's perspective, and sorry, this is Josh Bryson, Atlantic Richfield Company, for the BNRC to know that the BPSOU CD, and this is a reinforcement of statements that have already been made by Jim, contains a process for working through these technical issues. The CD requires the parties to consider all available data, including the data presented in this presentation tonight, and to further evaluate the BPSOU subdrain's effectiveness during the design process for the groundwater remedy. It's also important for the BNRC and the public to know that significant improvements to surface water quality have been achieved since the subdrain was installed during 2004 and 2005. We used to exceed Montana water quality standards in Silverbow Creek all the time. Now those standards are met in Silverbow Creek during dry conditions, when it's not raining, because the subdrain captures substantial amounts of impacted groundwater that would otherwise reach the creek. The subdrain helps protect the water quality of Blacktail and Silverbow Creeks, including the aquatic life in those streams. The BPSOU CD builds upon that initial and significant success and provides for installation of additional hydraulic controls at Blacktail Creek and Butte reduction works to collect more groundwater to further protect the streams. The proposed CD requires rigorous evaluation of the subdrain's performance. As part of that process, it requires the development of recommendations to optimize the existing groundwater remedies performance where necessary. Excuse me. Once the BPSOU CD is approved by the court, AR will be working with EPA, the state of Montana, and BSB to complete that work and to resolve any technical issues that come up during the remedial investigation and design process. Again, I think you guys have a vast amount of quality data, and the network that you've constructed will be extremely useful to us in the future as we all proceed through this consent decree process, assuming it's entered by the court, and we look forward to doing that. So thank you for the presentation, and thanks for your time.
Thanks, Josh. Do we have any other questions? Any other questions going once? Going twice? I see none. All right, seeing none, I think we'll go ahead and move on to our next agenda item, which is the BNRC letter regarding the Basin Creek Reservoir for recreation.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, this is John McKee. I guess I'm confused. I thought we had asked for this to be an action item. I see it's a discussion item now. As we go forward, can we find out why this item was changed?
John, you're very observant. We were looking at having this be an action item so that we could sign this letter and get it off to Chief Executive Palmer. And it made it to the agenda as a discussion item instead. So I think we had talked a little bit about maybe since the agenda went out to the public with this as a discussion item, I don't know that there's a protocol in which we can change it into an action item at this late date. Doug, would you help me out on this one?
Sure. This is Doug Martin. John, so yes, it did. We should have had this as an action item. That was something that we missed. However, I have had discussions with Butte Silverbow, and it actually works fairly well to, they are interested in coming in presenting the Basin Creek issue to the council in the near future. So we would look to have another BNRC meeting within the next month and invite the Butte Silverbow folks who are associated with the Basin Creek Reservoir operations to the meeting and present that information and their thoughts to the council. And at that time, the council can consider and make and take into action the letter and whether or not to send that letter to the chief executive. So giving Butte Silver Bow a chance to address the council and then having the council take action on that letter. At least to me, it sounded like a reasonable alternative than to have the action today, which we missed because we don't have that action. It wasn't listed as an action item on the agenda, and I will take responsibility for that. That was my fault.
Follow up, Madam Council. So, Madam Chair, it's no one's fault, Doug. I'm definitely not throwing any stones. Base question is, the conditions on the money were, pursuant to what we're asking for another meeting to find out why we can then send the letter. I mean, the money was given on the condition of that condition hasn't been met. So, I'm totally down to have another meeting. I love all you people. I'll meet with you guys for the next decade. I don't care. I've told you this before, but it was conditional on the money. So I guess, when I owe money to the bank, I don't say, well, I don't got it and are not going to do it. And so can we have a meeting about it? I mean, I pay the bank. So I guess I'm just sort of curious when these things are conditional on why the money was given those years ago, why we have to continue down this process. And that'd be my last question on this. Thank you.
And John, I would say that is correct. We just, we could have had it as an action item today. And as I said, we missed that. But I do think that, we can allow the Butte Silver Bow to present to the council, and then the same letter can be sent off to the council.
Hey, Doug, Madam Chair, this is Emmett Reardon. I'd like to comment, please.
Go ahead.
I totally agree with John. The thing is that as we move forward with this, we're on our third chief executive, and I think it's been like 8 years. I'm not sure how many, but as we just continue to have meetings, and we've now lost another summer. That's 3 years that the reservoir could have been open. So we definitely, at the next meeting, need an action plan to have an opening.
I agree. Have you considered a time frame for that, Doug, for that next meeting?
I haven't, Elizabeth. We just talked about that earlier today, and we'd have to. We will get something. I'll work with Ray, and we'll get something out to the council this week or early next week to set up that next meeting.
Okay, that sounds good.
Madam Chair?
Yep.
This is John Sesso. I wanted to ask, it's been brought to my attention that Trout Unlimited has prepared a conceptual plan or a reservoir recreation plan of some sort paid for by the BNRC or NRD or whatever. I don't know that I have seen that plan as it relates to the opening or what is anticipated at the reservoir. Could Doug, could you shed some light on that for me and maybe make that plan available to me and others so we can see what's in that plan as it relates to the work that Butte Silver Bow is doing to get this recreational area a reality?
So, members of the council and John, yes, in a small project grant, Trout Unlimited was allocated dollars from the BAO Small Project Fund to develop a master plan for this area. And I know they have worked with a local consultant or the local consultant WET to develop that plan. I will follow up, and then maybe we can ask them to present what they have at this next meeting as well.
Yeah, I would sure like to see the plan before that meeting occurs, so we have a starting point for the discussion as it relates to where we're going, what has been already paid for in terms of the design of recreation areas and how that dovetails into the operations at the reservoir, the filtration plant, so that strategic investments can be made. I know that the Butte Silver Bow is prepared to start with some type of security fencing in order to be able to ensure that recreational interests do not conflict with operational interests. But I'd sure like to see how that security investment dovetails with the plan that I've been told already exists. So if we could get that as a council, if I'm the only one who hasn't seen it, I'd sure like to see it prior to this discussion.
Elizabeth, I see that Casey Hackathorn with TU raised his hand. I would allow him to, I think, address John's question. You probably know.
That sounds great. Go ahead, Casey.
Hey all, Casey Hackathorn here from China Limited. I have not been involved entirely in that process, but the Georgia Grant chapter there in Butte's been working closely with WET to work on a master plan over the last year or so. And I think in the last couple of months, that plan, the options available for that plan have morphed a little bit from opening up new trails and more of a recreation intensive plan to some potential more primitive options that might not involve as much cost and might have a little bit less risk for the water system. So I'm certain that the chapter and WET would be willing to share where they've gotten so far, but that there isn't a final product at this point. And so I think what might be a good option would be to schedule some type of meeting to talk about what the near term options might be to get that open with a phased approach, I guess. So John, I guess there might not be a complete product yet to review, but I think that we could get there with some discussion.
Any other comments on the letter from the council? From the public?
Elizabeth, this is Emmett again.
Okay.
To speak. I guess I would just, would it be inappropriate to ask the council if the letter was acceptable to them as the draft that was sent out?
I missed, I think, the end of that question, Emmett, one more time.
Well, my question is, did any of the council members have any edits or problems with the letter as it is now?
McKee here, I don't.
I didn't. I thought it sounded good. Anyone else?
This is Dave. This is Dave. No, it was fine, I thought.
This is Helen. I thought it was fine.
This is Bill. I thought it was okay.
Great. It sounds like I'm not hearing anyone having any issues with it. It sounds like the letter is acceptable to the council as is without a full vote. But anyone with any changes or different idea on that?
This is Dave again with just some additional thoughts. I was out there last weekend, and it really has the potential to be quite a little treasure. So let's keep that in mind.
Great. Then what I hear is we'll get a meeting set up with Butte Silver Bow and also invite Trout Unlimited in and do a meeting in the very near future about this issue.
Madam Chair, I have to abstain because I haven't seen the letter, but what I hear is the council wants to send this letter like tomorrow and let that be a catalyst for this discussion we'll have eventually.
Madam Chair, this is John McKee. I'd be happy to move to accept the letter as written and send it and still have the meetings afterwards, but it's time to go ahead and voice our, our commitment to the city for this property and what's being done there. So my move is, my motion clearly is to send the letter as written.
And this is Emmett, I would second that.
Great. I have a motion and a second. Do we have any comment from the council or the public? All right. Anybody that disagrees with that? Any nays? All right. So I'm taking that as all yays from the council, and that passes. All right. We will get that letter to the chief executive.
Elizabeth, this is Doug again. One addition I would add is that we actually invite Butte Silver Bow to the next meeting in that letter to present as a closing paragraph that we could add to that.
Anybody oppose that?
No, this is Emmett. That's a good idea.
All right. Hearing no opposition, we'll go ahead and add that at the last paragraph and get it off to the chief executive.
Madam Chair, I would also, independent of that action, ask that whatever documentation or information that has been produced through this small grant, it's my understanding we've spent $90,000 as a council to do this plan, this preliminary plan, that may be made available. Whatever the deliverables are to that particular grant, and whatever report has been produced, be disseminated to us as soon as possible and prior to this discussion.
Sounds good. We can make that request also. Any opposition to that? Great. We'll make that. All right. Anything else on this item?
This is Dave again. Something that might be. This is Dave. Something that might be useful is a quick update from Butte Silver Bow on the grant proposal that they had for improving the dam.
Yeah, I think we could request that to be part of the next meeting. Is that what you're thinking? Okay.
That's exactly what I'm thinking. Yeah.
All right. Any other comments on this subject? Great. We have some action items from that one. With that, I think we'll go on to the timeline for the updated BAO restoration plan. And I believe Harley was going to present that.
Madam Chair, yes. Good evening, everybody. And I haven't had a chance to say it yet, but welcome, John. We look forward to working with you. So, yeah, I think we were just anticipating a kind of a high-level discussion to kick things off about where we're at with the BAO plan and what options might there be for moving ahead with it. As everybody knows, and from the preceding discussion, quite a few things have evolved and developed and changed within the Butte Area 1 and the Butte community that is affected by it. And so, you know, since the plan was adopted almost 8 years ago, you know, so just as examples of the kinds of things we probably need to, you know, start thinking about, and putting aside for a second sort of a timeline or, you know, the when thing or how, but, you know, whether we need to revisit allocations to project categories. And I think that's probably relevant in respect to, you know, the remedy that we now know much more about. That's probably relevant to, you know, change in circumstance, work that's been done, work that's worked well and work that's not, and so on. I mean, an assessment of those kinds of things. You know, an example there perhaps is just the re-veg category, which is provided for in the CD and the work plans, and so I think that causes occasion for the BNRC to kind of look at how the plan fits into that. Obviously, also, you know, we had a kind of an unspecified allocation in the plan of $1 million to recreation, and at some point we need to kind of hone in on what it is we would want to do with that. Now, so those are the kinds of things that I think would drive a process. You know, we have to also kind of take stock, I think, at this point, kind of, I got two buckets here: things we don't know for sure, and things we know more about. You know, there are a few variables that are still out there that two of them affect probably like the dollars available. You know, there are, as everybody recalls from the BAO plan amendments, the Parrot amendments that occurred in 2019, there's a reimbursement waterfall. So we do anticipate some of the BAO funds that were extended to support the Parrot project will be repaid in some fashion. One of the two principal sources is the Butte Site Fund that's provided for in the CD. And I think, as everybody's aware, I mean, the Blacktail Creek work that the state through DEQ, excuse me, sorry about that, is responsible for executing, you know, is first call on that money, and so we do have some estimates or projections and expectations on what that should take, and we did reach that number, the 20.5 in the CD, with it in mind that there would be excess, hopefully almost or up to a half is sort of the terminology that I think the state team is comfortable with, but we won't know that. I mean, you know, and the staging and the sequencing of the Blacktail Creek work, you know, may not be the first project out of the blocks. Now, I can't speak for DEQ on that, and I know there's going to need to be some coordination between BP and so there, even if we went forward with you know, some discussion of BAO amendments, we certainly probably could make some assumptions, but we wouldn't know for sure. I mean, related, and I think hopefully this is not as much of an issue. You know, another source of repayment to the BAO fund is the additional $5 million that the plan amendments identified as being a candidate or in the state's view, eligible for transfer from the streamside tailings operable unit. That transfer has not been effectuated yet. We're working on it. Hope to get it moving soon. So I don't anticipate a lot of trouble. It's just, or not trouble, but challenges. But it just needs, it's an uncertainty. and the other thing we really don't know, we do know and we don't know. I mean, we have work plans in the CD. We anticipate and are confident that it will be entered by the court and approved, and that we'll be proceeding down that path. And I do appreciate, just as an aside, I appreciate very much, Josh, your comments earlier on behalf of Atlantic Richfield. We do look forward to working with you as the state, as part of the state team in that process. So, but the point is the exact design. I mean, the architectural or engineering plans for the remedy are yet to be determined, and they could have some impact. Hopefully, as we start seeing what they look like, we can identify areas for coordination, integration, and so on. So those are kind of the uncertainties we're dealing with. But on the flip side, I mean, like I say, we do know more now than we have for quite some time, certainly since 2012. We do know we're going to have a new trustee in 5 months. I don't know that that's neither here nor there. I think the BNRC and NRDP will do its job, regardless. So, Doug and I spoke about this earlier, and Madam Chair, I'm sorry, haven't had a chance to visit with you about it, but kind of where we're landing on this is that maybe we can start talking about honing in on a few smaller or a few individual categories, but that a broader scale revision is probably 6 to 12 months off before we can get some additional information. So, some of the incremental things we could do over the short run is revisit some of the small projects. Doug can speak to the status of that better than I. As I indicated earlier, one of the fairly clearly identified items in the CD work plans is the re-veg program, and so that should provide a pretty solid basis on which to kind of do our own planning. So anyway, I've kind of droned on in this for a little bit. I'd ask Doug if you had anything additional to add to that.
This is Doug. The one comment I would make is that back in March, we did talk about the plan revision and moving forward with things. We were anticipating that the CD was going to be moving on a faster track during those conversations back in March. So, things have slowed down with the CD for a variety of reasons, it seems. But as Harley said, I do think that there are a number of things that we can start talking about and having some planning discussions so that when we do have the information that's needed to finalize a revision and make a recommendation to the trustee, we'll be ready to do that.
Thank you, guys. Do we have some discussion from the council on this item?
Madam Chair, John McKee here. Question to Jim and Doug. How long, I guess, can the current trustees still sign off on anything we do? Is there, any lame duck issues, or do we just go all the way till basically what, Jan 1, Jan 2?
Doug, I'll weigh in. This is Harley. The trustee, I mean, CERCLA provides that the governor of a state identifies or nominates or assigns who the trustee is. And in the case of Montana, the governor has historically assigned that role to him or herself. Presumably that exists till the last day in office. The one thing that is, so I think the power is there, but as you know, the CERCLA also requires any revisions or any actions of a trustee to be preceded and supported by public comment. And in the case of the BAO plan, there's also the BNRC process that prior trustees have laid out and committed to. So yeah, I think the trustee's the trustee till the last day, but you know, if we wanted to get something done, you know, but with this current trustee, I would say we would probably need to get going on it pretty quickly.
So, Madam Chair, follow up. Point being, I guess I was asking was that this trustee, I mean, yeah, we were all started off on Schweitzer, but this trustee, sorry, those of us who are still here from day one, we started off under Schweitzer, but this trustee has basically been the one that's committed to it, right? He signed on our previous plan. He's signed, which is current plan. He's signed off on, you know, the Parrot work and making it happen. And I think we have, you know, a pretty understood ally in the process. And so to the point of how do we do a plan other than just backtracking on the public comment period by day, you know, total days required +1, I really don't have a concern about us being able to put together a plan as the current council in the time remaining. I mean, I understand there's these waterfalls of money coming in and these other places where it might appear based on reimbursement and other things, but to be honest, that's pretty simple project management. All we have to do is sit down and say, okay, if the money comes back in on case 1 this way, then this is what we want that money to do. If the money doesn't come back in, okay, this is what we want the money remaining to do. And at least that's a 1 afternoon meeting. And we could have that plan done out for public comment and off to a trustee that we know has the commitment of Butte and its environmental future at heart. So, I mean, to the council, my opinion would be, this isn't a big of a lift. We've got most of it done. We've done it once before. Let's do it again. This is why we stood up. This is why we sit in these meetings at home now, I guess. This is why we sit in these meetings. Let's just do it and get it done so the current trustee can sign before the current trustee's term as a political officer of the state is done. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thanks, John. Do we have any other discussion on this item?
Madam Chair,
Go ahead, John.
I don't know how strongly I can second the notion that John just presented. And if that means that we need to put the first planning meeting to update our restoration on the plan for our next meeting, let's do it. And let's make a goal right now to have a updated plan in front of the trustee, you know, within 90 days. And we're not going to get there unless we start today. And I can't agree more with John McKee.
I would echo John and John's comments, and let's get the plan updated before the trustee is out of office.
Great, thanks, Helen. I will throw my opinion in there also, as I also think we ought to do this and get it on the agenda and get going on it.
We need to begin scheduling regular meetings so we can do this.
Any other comment on this item from the council?
This is Dave. No, I agree. That sounds good.
So, Madam Chair, I guess this is Harley. If I could just ask for clarification, it seems like the council is driving towards a sense of the council type statement, which, you know, I would say for the program, we will do everything we can. It's our job to support the VNRC in this process. And if that is the sense, you know, I think we'd have to sit down as a program, Ray, Doug, everybody here, and kind of put our heads together on what it is we think a process would look like and commitments. It frankly might require us to juggle some stuff because it, you know, to the extent, yeah, just resource stuff. So anyhow, I guess and Doug, please, if I'm overcommitting or overstating anything, selling anything, please weigh in.
Sorry, go ahead, Doug.
This is Doug. No, we can, Elizabeth, we can put this on the agenda for discussion at the next meeting when we, since we are going to have one shortly. I would, go on record to let the council members and the public know that due to some of the uncertainties of what we know about what exactly will be done with the remedy, will lead to some, vagueness in the restoration plan. We won't be able to come up with, specifics. So that will be, that is one of the concerns that we had talked about here as why waiting a period of time would make for a more detailed and clear restoration plan. But if the council does want to push forward, we can work with you guys to come up with a restoration plan that can work. It would just, please note that there would be some more, there won't be the specifics in it that could be in if we waited. But we will put it on the agenda for the next meeting.
Great, and I'd just like to clarify, I think I'm speaking for the council, so if I step on any toes here, pipe up. But as John McKee said, I'm going to have to specify John's. As John McKee said, we did the bulk of the writing of the last plan, and we expect to do that for the plan coming forward. So if that helps take some of the heavy lifting off of the NRDP staff, I appreciate that. But we have been a very hands-on council from the very beginning, and we want to, I think that's what we're saying is we want to take this on, and we appreciate your guidance and help doing it, but I really feel like the bulk of the lifting can be done by the council. Anybody on the council disagree with that sentiment?
Madam Chair, this is John McKee. I'd like to see Ray super involved. He is Butte's, coordinator for all of this, not just an environmental scientist for NRD. So, yeah, we'll do it, and we'll all hop right in on this, but I really expect to see Ray participating in the way in which his role was initially outlined by Department of Justice underneath Schweitzer's term, please. Thank you.
If I may interrupt, this is Ray. Absolutely, that's what we've discussed, and I appreciate that input. So.
Madam Chair, this is Helen Joyce, and I would just say that I think it would be a great opportunity for Ray to become intimately familiar with our plan, and a good exercise, get it updated with close involvement of the council.
So I look forward to that opportunity.
Great. Your predecessor was very involved in the first plan, so that sounds great. We look forward to working with you on it, Ray.
And Madam Chair, this is Harley. So I think we got the clear sense of the NRC, and so we will proceed accordingly.
Great, thank you. Do we, before we move on, are there any comments from the public on this?
Sure. Madam Chair, I don't mean to be too precise about this, but proceeding accordingly, according to Harley, is a little bit ill-defined for my taste. I'm not sure even when the next meeting of the council is going to be. When I heard that the last one was March 12th, I'm a little concerned if we wait too long. Is there a means for us to be more specific about the agenda item for the next meeting, where we would ask the staff to prepare the template, whatever it is we have to do in terms of updating? Harley mentioned a couple of things, the resource allocations that are in the plan. The bulk of the plan is already written. An update is a lot easier than writing a plan from scratch. Yes, we don't know specifically what the remedy will produce in terms of how it affects the previous investments we planned under the first BAO plan, but we got a pretty darn good idea of what can be done under remedy now and where we would want to point our resources going forward. So can I get a sense of when the next meeting is? Because if it's September and we wait till September to have a discussion about updating the plan, I think we're going to miss, you know, an opportunity to maybe get together, get a Zoom together, get a workshop together. We have just the plan in front of us, kind of walk through it, page turn it, mark it up where we think we have to update, get some ideas on paper, produce them, and then maybe have that discussion at the next BNRC meeting. I mean, if we're serious about getting the update done by December, I think we got to do a lot of spade work right here in August.
I would totally agree with that, John. I think what we were trying, at least this is my read of it, was to coordinate this meeting with the meeting with Butte Silver Bow on the Basin Creek stuff, which we also want to have in the very near future. So I don't know if we can exactly pick a date tonight, but some other thoughts on that.
Madam Chair, and again, Doug kind of helped me out here, but John, I did not intend to be intentionally vague there. I just was trying to indicate we will proceed with all due haste, and probably from what I'm hearing you say, with very much haste. Because yeah, in order to get it done by then, we have to jump on it. So I think we will plan on convening internal discussions starting tomorrow and kind of map out a pretty aggressive outreach to the BNRC and staffing support and get back to you right away. And I don't know if we're in a position to pick another date for the next BNRC meeting tonight. But no, I understand your point.
So this is Doug, and as I said previously, what we'll do is we will query the BNRC, if not tomorrow, the first thing next week, to set up a date for the next meeting, to invite Butte Silver Bow to talk about Basin Creek and also to talk about the revision. So we will do that at your earliest convenience, but we'll throw some dates out there, you know, within the next couple days to you folks.
All right, do we have any other comments here? Go ahead, John.
Well, I was going to switch topics. Thank you for that. I think we got to move on that plan business quickly, and I'm available in August to try to get a workshop together where we can kind of kick around the ideas and get going. I was just kind of following up on Ray in your current status right now. I appreciate the fact that you're getting around the best you can. Is there a particular time or a way that people could come to the? Do you have office hours yet? Is that set up? How do we kind of get in touch with you? I got your cell, but how does generally people connect with you?
Yeah, this is Ray, John, Elizabeth. So I'll post my phone number in the meeting chat here, as well as my email. I'm happy to meet with most anyone anytime. So with the caveat that I may need to check in with Harley or Doug at some, as we go along. So.
As far as the office, are you in the office on any particular days, or is there?
Yeah. Sorry, John, if that was your specific question. I'm in the office unless I'm in the field Tuesday through Friday, and that was explicit. That's why I'm here, is to be available for the community and to have physical seat here. So in the chat, I'll write my email, my phone, as well as the office location, and look forward to sitting down with you and whomever else. Does that help, John?
No, thanks. I just been by a couple times, haven't been able to find you. I just wondered if I was just not, if you weren't there yet, or what the deal was.
Yeah,
I
I'm
just
around.
want to, start
Yep.
this conversation as quickly as possible, and I just wanted everybody to be advised on how we can reach you and get the conversation going ASAP. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
Ray, this is Dave Williams. I look forward to working with you as well.
Thank you, Dave. I appreciate that.
All right, one more time. Any other questions or comments from the council on this item? If not, are there any comments or questions from the public on this item? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and move to the update on the CD. And Harley, I think you were going to take this one too, if you would.
Madam Chair, yeah, actually, Catherine, was going to?
Yeah, I'm here.
All right, go for it.
Yep. Hi, everyone. This is Catherine Hausrath, and I'm an attorney for NRDP. So briefly, the U.S. Department of Justice received over 60 comments on the consent decree when it went out for public comment after lodging, and DEQ also is required to put it out for public comment under state superfund, and DEQ received 9 comments. We have not gotten a draft of the responses to review, but we will work closely to review the comments and look to see if the standard in the consent decree is met, which is the comments regarding whether the comments regarding this consent decree disclose facts or considerations which indicate that this consent decree is inappropriate, improper, or inadequate. And so we'll be working closely with everyone to make sure that there are appropriate responses to each of the comments. And just briefly in closing, I know everyone's tired, but I just wanted to reiterate that NRDP is very supportive of the CD for the reasons Jim and others mentioned. And we haven't seen anything yet that would indicate that it is inappropriate, improper, and inadequate. In fact, we think it has a great package of additional control of contaminated groundwater to keep it from adversely affecting the creeks, the sediment monitoring that Jim talked about and is much better suited to discuss to make sure that the creeks don't get recontaminated. And of course, of major interest to this council is the leftover funds that will go to repay for some of the Parrot tailings works. So again, we are very supportive of it. We're excited to see it brought to conclusion and hopefully entered by the court sometime this year. Thank you. And do you have any questions?
Madam Chair, this is John McKee. I got to ask you to update your statement a minute ago about how many public comments are received by the EPA. I believe you said the number 60, and if I would be, well, I'll just say it for Fritz Daly. When he's out in the cemetery pushing up daisies and waving at planes, I'm pretty sure he's commented more than 60 times to the EPA on this already. So I'm curious where that number came from, and if I just misunderstood it.
So what I said was over 60 comments to the U.S. Department of Justice on the consent decree. That doesn't include previous comments that were submitted on the ROD amendment, general emails to EPA. It's also a little bit of a confusing number because there were some folks who replied all to some of his emails, and so it may be 70. But the point is that all of the comments get responded to. And so if 10 people replied all and said, yes, I support Fritz's comments or whatever, there will be a response to that comment. Does that help?
I think just Fritz definitely commented a lot. And we would all be remiss in not acknowledging that and not acknowledging that I feel like the number of 60 and it was response to CD, not response to our ROD or anything else. So I don't know. I just made it said by this council that we hear Fritz, and
right.
I certainly hope EPA does.
No, and I would assure you that we worked when we were involved helping respond to the responses to comments on, or we helped respond to the comments on the ROD amendment. NRDP put a lot of effort into making sure that there were full responses to each comment raised by the public. We understand that this is a very, very important issue to the people of Butte, and people deserve a legitimate explanation, answer, pointing to where something is addressed in the CD. And so we will make sure that there is a robust response to comments to the best of our ability. We are committed to making sure that everyone understands the CD as much as possible and understands why we're supportive of it after many years of fighting over a lot of these issues. So absolutely. And I agree. I read Fritz's emails too. So I'm well aware too.
Madam Chair, I just to follow up with Catherine. Catherine, was it such the way it was that every comment that was submitted to the federal government was simultaneously submitted to the state? Do you have both the same comments to respond to? The same number of comments and the same comments to respond to, or are there unique ones that were sent to the feds and not to the state, and to the state, not to the feds?
Well, there was one unique comment that was submitted to DEQ and not submitted to USDOJ, is my understanding. It was a comment from the Greeley Neighborhood Association. But DEQ only received 9 comments and USDOJ received 60 or 70, depending on how those reply alls are counted.
So you're not responsible for answering the ones that were sent to the federal government?
Well, we're not responsible for it, but they will be inviting our input on it.
Oh, good.
Is my understanding.
And
yeah,
then how about the 8 that you got? That 8 of the 9 you got are the same ones they got?
Yes, that's my understanding from.
Okay.
I just checked with the USDOJ attorney and the DEQ attorney today to make sure I was tracking this properly, and that's what they told me today.
Is there a timeline on when you might be able to get those response completed?
It will be a top priority for our office when we get them. So Jim and I will devote the resources needed to do it, but we haven't gotten them yet. So, I mean, we've gotten the comments, just not the proposed responses to comments. So as soon as we get them, we will put the needed effort to provide our input as quickly as possible. We're all very committed to getting this responded to.
Okay. Yeah.
You're welcome. Sorry. Went back on mute too soon.
Any other comments from the council on this item?
I'm sorry, what was that?
I just wondered if there were any other questions or comments from the council on this item. It doesn't look like it. Any from the public? Also seeing none. I think do we have a motion to adjourn?
Madam Council, this is John McKee. Quick clarification, and I apologize for backing up just one thing. I know everybody wants to be done. Ray, do you live in Butte?
Yes, sir, I do. Uptown Butte.
Right on. Glad to have you. Let's go have a whiskey. Madam Chair, I move to adjourn.
Do we have a second to that?
I'll second.
I'll second.
Great. Any questions or comments before we vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any nays? We are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Stay
you.
safe, everybody.
Thank you all. Have a good evening.
Thank you.